Secret talks are underway over the development of at least 3 new US military bases in Greenland. Washington's top planning team is in discussions with Denmark over ramping up its presence on the snow-covered island just months after Donald Trump threatened to invade.
The sort of nub of this issue appears to be the desire of the US to better protect itself, as they say, against Russian and Chinese missiles, and seems to be part of what President Trump calls his beautiful golden dome. He is, I think, referring to or trying to replicate Israel's Iron Dome over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which protects those towns from missiles coming ostensibly from Lebanon and also now from Iran. So this seems to be behind it. And from a sort of tactical perspective, it sort of makes sense. There are a lot of American listening posts on Greenland. It is likely that any missiles fired from Russia or China at the US would go in the vicinity of Greenland, not necessarily directly over it. Therefore, any bases America has there that would be part of this Golden Dome missile system, if you like, sort of makes sense and is a lot less than the maximalist position we were talking about a few months ago. So it seems reasonable, which is not something we generally associate with Trump and the Trump administration. The Americans are very conscious and certainly very vocal in their opposition to further expansion of Russian and Chinese, particularly military bases in the Arctic, and we are well aware that Russia has been expanding massively, and also the ability for it to put submarines under the ice in that area is a concern. So to have forward bases in Greenland to cover the missile defense system and also keep a very close eye on what the Chinese and the Russians are doing in the Arctic seems to make sense. Of course, Alaska is very close to the Arctic, much further to the west than Greenland, and probably cannot cover this side of the Arctic. So to be able to have bases and troops in Greenland, really on the very edge of the Arctic, if not in it itself, would make that much easier. And I suppose we're also talking mainly about deterrence here. And certainly having US forces there may well deter the Russians and Chinese from extending their military bases, and having a comprehensive Golden Dome anti-missile system, some of which would be based in Greenland, again, as a deterrence against any countries that might try and attack the US with ballistic missiles. Does the American increased involvement in Greenland, is that a signal to the potential we're hearing about that the US wants to pull out of NATO? Well, on the bare face of it, I suppose it could be having a much more sort of rearward defence, if you like. But that would be to suggest that President Trump has a long-range plan on all these very detailed and complex strategic geopolitical situations. And that is not something that I think we would associate with President Trump. President Trump seems to make very quick decisions on very short timelines, which often change. So although there might be some very clever and brilliant planners in the Pentagon who are looking at this and perhaps suggesting that if the US did want to withdraw from NATO and save money, then having a defence much closer to the US mainland might sort of counteract that activity. But I haven't heard the two being mentioned in the same word. Well, how do we look at Greenland with everything else that's happening around the globe at the moment? It's sort of difficult to say. Of course, all these great global events are interlinked and affect each other. But the main activity going on at the moment is Iran, and the US and the Israelis attacking Iran. Now, Iran does have ballistic missiles, that's for sure. And whether they have ballistic missiles that can fire as far as the US, that seems unlikely. We know from their attack on Diego Garcia, the UK and US base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, which is about 4,000 miles from Iran, that they have that range, and which incidentally would bring London into range from Iranian missiles. But the US is sort of twice as far as that. So one cannot think that even President Trump would conflate Greenland as defense against Iran. However, of course, the other major conflict happening is in Ukraine with the Russians, and the nuclear threat between Russia and the US is really part of the main sort of dividend or activity that people have been concerned about. And although it inextricably includes NATO, certainly from a conventional perspective, not really from a nuclear. So I think it's more of the new administration, Trump's administration, or particularly his view that it's America first, defense of the US homeland, mainland, is really all that matters. And therefore, why not save a whole bunch of money by having your forces arrayed in somewhere like Greenland, adjacent to the US mainland, rather than deploy troops all around the world at great expense and effort to the US government. So again, on the face of it, that would seem sensible if that is your policy. However, there are so many other policies coming out of Trump's mouth at the moment that would then knock that idea back entirely. So we shall wait and see. I think the main thing is that now the Americans are not looking to take over the whole of Greenland, which would, in effect, would be taking a sovereign country and another, at the moment, NATO member. Then we can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief that the pressure has gone out of that particular event, which could have caused a massive rift, really, between the Europeans and the Americans, far more than any move by the US to leave NATO. I think when you look at it purely objectively, yes, of course, the US could very easily take Greenland by force. There are very little Greenlandish or Danish military on Greenland to protect it. Greenland is a massive, it's the biggest island in the world, massive country. And of course, the US has a massive military. So I don't think there would be any difficulty at all. And, certainly what one's seen recently with the war in Ukraine and the war in Iran, it seems pretty unlikely that fellow European countries are going to come steaming across the Atlantic to Greenland's aid if the US did invade and take the country by force. But there are flashpoints all over the world, absolutely. But also there's a whole raft of the world that's been completely untouched physically by what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Iran, although, of course, everybody's affected by the price of oil. When it comes to another sort of massive shock like conflict over Greenland, yeah, who knows? I think the main thing is everybody is striving for a just peace in Ukraine at the moment and a ceasefire in Iran, and the last thing people need is another potential conflict in another part of the world involving the major superpowers. So, yeah, to be avoided at all costs, I think.